There's something about the energy on the first day of school. The air is buzzing with excited students as they enter the room, happy to see their friends. And as a music teacher, that energy is always a delight to see. But I specifically remember this one girl because she wasn't laughing. She wasn't talking. All the other students came in with their book bags, their notebooks, and all of their things. But this girl came in with not even a piece of paper. And so class began, and I began to tell the students how fun music is. I made them laugh, and I told them stories about some of the things we were going to learn in the class. And this little girl, she was on the front row. She had this look of intrigue and wonderment in her eyes. Her eyes were darting around because she was afraid she was going to forget the things I was talking about because she had nothing to write it down on. And I watched her reach into her pocket and pull out a dry erase marker that she had. And she pulled up her sleeve and she began to write down the names of the people I was talking about on her arm because she wanted to go home to learn more about these people even before I had taught them in the class. She left class that day with smudges on her arm, but a smile on her face. And I left amazed at the student's desire to learn. It was only later that I began to understand why she was doing this. You see, what I was teaching gave her pride in her own culture. I was not teaching the traditional music appreciation narrative of classical music. Instead, I was teaching something that she could relate to that was relevant to her and to her ancestry. And she was so fascinated by that she wrote it down on her arm. And this was a sixth grader. It was in that moment, it was confirmed to me that the way that we're teaching culture is totally wrong. Curriculum dictates that there's Western and Eastern culture, West and the rest. But that does not exist. Instead, we're going to see today that culture is a stitchwork, a tapestry, an interweaving of people from all across the world. And we are connected in ways that many people don't even realize. My name is Vincent Sneed. And I've been teaching music in public schools for the last 20 years. And that is what I'm going to demonstrate to you today. And I'm specifically going to focus on the influence of African and the descendants of African peoples on music to do that. When people think of music history, they might think of Mozart or Beethoven or Johann Sebastian Bach. Even if you don't recognize the people that I just named, you might have recognized the tunes that I played. That's because these are the people who get the most attention in a music appreciation class or even a college music history class. But what if I told you that these European composers wrote music that had its roots in Africa? There's a very well-known composer by the name of Georg Friedrich Handel. He's the one that wrote, Hallelujah, 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 Hallelujah. He also wrote a tune called A Sarabande, and this is how it sounds. That sounds very refined, very royal. I could imagine a king or a queen walking into a royal palace. But what happens if I speed up the tempo and add some rhythmic energy? Take a listen. God. Totally different sound. It no longer sounds refined and royal. Now it sounds fun and energetic. And that's because the saraband is a dance. And it was originally an African dance. It came from the Congo, where it was called Nsalabanda. The Spanish took that dance and they called it a zarabanda, and it comes to us today as a saraband. Not only did Handel write one, Mozart wrote a saraband, and Johann Sebastian Bach wrote 39 of these African dances. We can see, even in European concert music, that culture is not so black or white, pun intended. Let's go to the United States now. Millions of slaves were brought from Africa to the Americas. But unfortunately, when discussing the influence of African and African Americans on American music, it's usually confined to genres like jazz, hip hop, soul, or funk. But it goes far beyond that. Let me give you a few examples. One of the first things the Europeans noticed about Africans was that they loved music and that they were amazing musicians. So they would recruit or force African slaves to perform the music for their dances, the instrumental music. The slaves would then take those dances and do them on their own. They even began to call out the dance moves that the dancers were supposed to do. Now, the white dancers at first were not very pleased about this, but eventually they embraced it, and it became known here as square dancing. The population forgot that the do-si-do that you would hear in square dancing actually originated with black slaves. Let me give you another example. It was the 1860s. Abraham Lincoln had just been elected president, and in response, state by state in the South began to secede from the Union. Georgia, South Carolina, Virginia, Texas. They were going to form a brand new nation, the Confederate States of America. But if you have a new nation, you have to have a new president. And they decided on Jefferson Davis. They even had an inauguration for him in Montgomery, Alabama, in which 10,000 people attended. They even had music playing at the inauguration. And one of the songs that was being played was this. That tune is called Dixie. It was written by a minstrel composer, Daniel Decatur Emmett, and it became the national anthem of the Confederacy. In fact, if you go to Dan Emmett's grave, it says on his tombstone that he wrote the song that inspired the Southern people. But not too far away from Dan Emmett's grave is a cemetery in which Ben and Lou Snowden are buried. And it says on their grave, they taught Dixie to Dan Emmett. Ben and Lou Snowden were African American musicians. To some unknown extent, these musicians had an influence on Dan Emmett. Imagine the Confederate national anthem written by African Americans. Let me give you another example. Again, the 1860s. There was a meeting in the House of Representatives, and they began to sing this song. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. When they got to the last verse, everybody stood up, and this is what they sang. In the beauty of the lilies, Christ was born across the sea with the glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me. As he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free while God is marching on. Everybody cheered with excitement. Abraham Lincoln was there. He was in tears. That's the Battle Hymn of the Republic, written by Julia Ward Howe. But did you know that that tune comes from another song called Say Brothers Won't You Meet Us on Canaan's Happy Shore? And that tune was first heard being sang in the 19th century in camp meetings by guess who? African Americans. You see, this patriotic song that's been sung at countless events in the 19th, 20th, and 21st century was actually a black spiritual. What about country music? Is there any African influence in country music? Indeed, the banjo, considered to be a staple instrument in both bluegrass and country music, actually has its heritage in Africa and was invented by African slaves in the Americas. Some of the greatest country and bluegrass musicians, such as Bill Monroe and Hank Williams, had their first lessons with black musicians. Oh, and by the way, the southern accent that you hear, what people call that twang in country music, it has an interesting history as well. Recent research has shown that that actually comes from the influence of enslaved population on southern whites. Country music was a synthesis of black banjo music, fiddle music, and white folk songs. What about rock and roll? You know, Elvis Presley, not only did he grow up around black musicians, but he would sneak out of church and he would go to black churches where he loved to hear the quartet singing, the singing quality of the preacher, and he admired it so much that he imitated that same energy in his own performances. I hope that you can see that culture is not as black or white as you might think. That culture such as square dancing and country music and classical music are not as one-sided as you may have thought. And I do not mean to suggest in this talk that all music came from Africa. Instead, I want to inspire, to encourage, to motivate you to do research on your own into other cultures and how they have influenced the world. Yes, it's been interesting to learn about the influences of Africa on classical music or the African American origins of the Battle Hymn of the Republic, but that just scratches the surface. And this goes beyond music as well. You can learn about the influences on science and food and fashion and art. You can learn about Asian cultures, Native American cultures, even religious cultures like Judaism or Islam. You'll learn that the numbers that we use, those come from India. Algebra comes from the golden age of Islam. And fireworks, they come from China. Not only will you learn about others when you do this, but you will discover yourself. You can take pride in how you fit and how you contribute into this global tapestry of culture, just like my student did, except you won't have to write it down on your arm. The more you learn, the more you will realize there is no Western and Eastern culture, West and the rest. It's just culture. That the global tapestry is so interwoven that culture itself is worldly. That we all take parts of each other and we integrate them. That we make beautiful things even more beautiful when we interweave them and when we know where those threads come from. In such a polarized world, learning this can help us to stop seeing each other as separate people and start seeing that we're all connected, that we all need each other. We are all part of each other. We are one